Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are basically completely flipping the script on history's most infamous villain.
Yeah, we really are taking a huge swing today.
We are. I mean, we have a genuinely fascinating stack of sources in front of us. There's this dense, highly esoteric chapter we're looking at called Judas Iscariot, the Shadow, and the Initiatory Fall.
Right, which is part of a much larger exploration of the 12 apostles and, their archetypal connections to Freemasonry.
Exactly. And alongside that text, you, our listener, sent in this striking, highly symbolic piece of art that we are definitely going to decode today.
It's a really great image.
It is. So our mission today is to look completely beyond the 2,000-year-old narrative of the ultimate traitor. We want to explore Judas not as some, dead end of spiritual failure, but as a vital, absolutely necessary catalyst for transformation.
Which, it's a radical reframing, but it is actually a very ancient one.
Right, because in esoteric traditions like Hermeticism, or if we look at figures like Lucifer in the mystical sense, or even Typhon in Egyptian mythology, it's a recurring theme.
Exactly. The force of separation, the force that appears to fiercely oppose the divine, is actually the exact mechanism that makes divine manifestation possible. You can't have a play without an antagonist.
Or a spark without friction.
Precisely.
And I want to say right up front to you listening, if you have ever wrestled with your own feelings of failure, or those moments of intense self-sabotage, or if you just struggle with the darker, messier parts of your own psyche, this deep dive is going to completely change how you view those experiences.
We are going to reframe them entirely.
Not as fatal flaws, but as the essential starting blocks for your own growth. So to jump in, we all know the canonical basics of Judas, right?
Or the treasure of the 12, the 30 pieces of silver.
And the cinematic kiss in the Garden of Gethsemane. But what is incredibly revealing here is how the traditional narrative just sort of splinters the moment he dies.
The contradictions in the biblical accounts of his death are our first major clue. We're dealing with something deeper than historical journalism here.
Because the Gospel of Matthew tells a story of crushing remorse, right, where he tries to return the silver and hangs himself.
Yeah, but then the book of Acts gives us this visceral, grotesque ending. He falls headlong into a field, and his body literally bursts asunder, his bowels spilling out.
Which is incredibly graphic.
It is. And the fact that the early church couldn't even agree on the mechanics of his demise suggests his true function in the narrative was symbolic. He had to be utterly destroyed, annihilated, basically to serve as the ultimate cautionary tale.
Right. He became the permanently damned soul, the ultimate example of what happens when you cross the divine. But our primary source takes a massive left turn here.
It really does. It bypasses the traditional canon entirely to look at a text that was lost to the desert sands for nearly 2 millennia.
The Gospel of Judas.
Yes. Discovered in the 1970s as part of the Codex Chacos, and finally restored and published in 2006.
And this text completely inverts the Orthodox narrative, doesn't it?
Entirely. It was written by Gnostic Christians who held a vastly different view of the cosmos. In their cosmology, the material world wasn't a beautiful garden created by a loving God.
It was a prison.
Exactly. A flawed, heavy, dense trap constructed by a lesser, ignorant creator deity known as the Demiurge. And he was often aided by cosmic jailers called archons.
So in that view, the physical body itself is just a fleshy cell holding the divine spark hostage.
Precisely. And in this text, Jesus is a divine being sent from the true, higher spiritual realm to show humanity how to escape this material prison.
But the other disciples just don't get it.
No, they don't. The text depicts them as somewhat ignorant, still praying to the lesser god of the material world. Judas is portrayed as the only apostle who actually grasps the true depth of Jesus' origin and mission.
Wow.
And because he understands, Jesus takes him askew and gives him a specific, excruciating assignment. He instructs Judas to betray him.
He literally asks for it.
Yes. Jesus tells him, quote, "You will exceed all of them, for you will sacrifice the man that clothes me."
Wait, so instead of being the ultimate backstabber, this text frames him as the ultimate team player taking the hardest assignment.
That is a great way to put it, actually.
It's almost like being the heel in professional wrestling. You willingly step into the ring to take all the hatred, all the boos from the crowd, to sacrifice your own reputation so the main event can actually happen.
Right.
You are the bad guy, but you're working for the show. The story has to move forward.
What's fascinating here is how perfectly that analogy fits the esoteric concept of the sacrificial initiate.
The sacrificial initiate.
Yeah. Judas is taking on the immense, crushing karma of betrayal to facilitate a higher mystery. In the Gnostic view, Jesus needs his physical form to be violently broken so his spiritual essence can be free.
To return to the divine realm.
Exactly. He cannot just die of old age. The breaking of the physical vessel is a required, dramatic, cosmic event.
And Judas knows this.
He knows he will be despised. He knows his name will become a curse word for millennia. But he pulls the trigger anyway out of obedience to a hidden divine plan.
He is the mechanism that frees the spirit from the flesh. Now, obviously, this text isn't in the canonical Bible.
No, it's not.
But its existence proves that early on, there were thinkers who recognized the absolute necessity of the adversary. They understood the paradox that sometimes the fall is a required step for the ascent.
Right.
But how do we bridge that gap? Because this profound cosmic drama of the demiurge and the archons is fascinating. But our sources argue that this entire mythology is actually a map of the individual human mind.
And this brings us to the core of the esoteric tradition. The ancient mysteries didn't just tell stories about beings in the sky.
They told stories about the architecture of the soul.
Exactly. The clearest way to understand the Judas archetype living inside every single one of us is through the lens of spiritual alchemy.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because when we hear alchemy, we usually think of, medieval guys trying to turn literal lead into gold, right? The guys with the bubbling flasks.
Yeah. But the sources are talking about the transformation of human consciousness.
The metal was always just a metaphor. In the alchemical process of refining the soul, the very first necessary stage is called the nigredo.
Or putrefactio, right?
Yes, the blackening. The rotting, before you can ever hope to create the Philosopher's Stone, which represents the ultimate state of spiritual perfection and wholeness, the base matter has to completely break down.
The materia prima.
Exactly. You cannot take a raw, flawed ego and just polish it into something divine. It has to dissolve. It has to face its own corruption.
It's biology, too, honestly. It's like a caterpillar in a chrysalis.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
Yeah, we always talk about the beautiful butterfly emerging, but we completely skip over what actually happens inside that cocoon. The caterpillar doesn't just sprout wings, wake up, and fly away.
No, it doesn't.
It completely digests itself. It dissolves into absolute, unrecognizable goo first. Its entire structural integrity breaks down. The ego has to undergo that exact same putrefactio, that total dissolution, before anything beautiful or new can emerge.
And what triggers that dissolution is the realization that the current state of the ego is a dead end. The psychologist Carl Jung mapped this exact biological and alchemical breakdown onto the human psyche.
When he developed the concept of the shadow.
Yes. Jung looked at the Judas archetype and saw it as the ultimate manifestation of the unconscious aspects of the self, the parts we desperately try to repress, deny, or hide from the world.
The greed, the cowardice, the laziness, the stuff we shove into the basement of our minds, lock the door, and pretend doesn't exist.
Exactly. In his profound book, Answer to Job, Jung argues that true wholeness as a human being requires the integration of this dark side.
You can't just be all light.
No, that is a dangerous illusion. For the individual seeker, the initiate, Judas is the inner betrayer. He is the voice that seeks comfort over truth.
The part of you that will sell out your own soul, your own highest potential for 30 pieces of fleeting temporary gain.
We all know that voice intimately.
Oh, yeah. The voice that says, don't take the risk, stay in the relationship, is toxic because being alone is scary.
Right.
Don't have the hard conversation, just lie to keep the peace.
Yeah.
That is the inner Judas trading your spiritual evolution for the silver of immediate comfort.
And the mechanism of projection makes this even more insidious. Jung warned that whatever we do not integrate from our shadow, we project outward onto the world.
So we see it in other people instead of ourselves.
Exactly. If you refuse to acknowledge your own inner Judas, your own capacity for betrayal and cowardice, you will start seeing enemies everywhere.
You'll constantly feel betrayed by others, by society, by God.
Yes, you become trapped in a victim narrative. Confronting this inner Judas, looking him in the eye and acknowledging that his darkness is your darkness is the actual initiation.
The descent into your own shadow isn't damnation.
No, it is diagnostic. It is the only way to reclaim the energy you've been using to keep the basement door locked.
And the energy required to repress the shadow is immense. So this truth that we must embrace our own darkness and allow our egos to be destroyed is incredibly dangerous to orthodox institutions.
Very dangerous.
Because an institution wants you to be obedient, right? Not to undergo a radical, self-guided ego death. which explains why these ideas had to be hidden, encoded into visual ciphers and the symbols of esoteric orders to survive.
Which brings us directly to the striking image that you, the listener, provided for us to analyze.
Yes, let's get into that.
It is a remarkable piece of visual synthesis. It takes the Orthodox narrative and completely overlays it with the esoteric cipher.
Let me describe it for everyone listening. We are looking at an illustration of Jesus, standing centrally, with a serene expression surrounded by the faces of the apostles in an archway around him.
The classic Christian scene.
Right, but laid over this is undeniable Masonic and alchemical imagery. Right over Jesus' chest is a massive, glowing eye of providence inside a downward-pointing triangle.
Which is incredibly prominent.
Very. And below that, dominating the lower half of his body, are the classic Masonic square and compasses. But inside them is a blazing sun with a face.
Yes.
Flanking all of this, you have a caduceus, the winged staff with two intertwined snakes. On the other side, crossed swords pointing upward. There's a chalice, an open book, and heavy astrological symbols in the corners.
The artist has created a map of the initiated mind here. The figure of Christ represents the perfected soul, the divine center, the philosopher's stone we talked about in alchemy.
But surrounding him are all the tools required to achieve that state?
Exactly. Look at the caduceus. The two snakes intertwined around the central staff represent the reconciliation of opposites.
The light and the dark.
The conscious and the unconscious, Jesus and Judas. They are not fighting. They are weaving together to elevate the soul, represented by the wings at the top.
Wow. And the crossed swords. They sit right next to the apostles.
The swords represent the severing, the intellect cutting away the dead flesh of the old ego.
Because you can't reconcile the opposites without first brutally cutting away your illusions.
Precisely. The swords represent the necessary betrayal of the old self.
That makes so much sense. The betrayal isn't an act of evil. It is the swift cut of the blade that allows the sun, which in the image is caged inside the square and compasses, to finally radiate.
Beautifully put.
Now, the text dives deep into how this plays out in Freemasonry. And while there isn't a direct character named Judas who walks into a lodge and betrays everyone, the energetic signature of Judas is deeply embedded in the craft's most profound mysteries.
It really is. It is the central pivot of the Master Mason degree, which revolves around the allegory of Hiram Abiff.
The legendary chief architect of King Solomon's temple.
Yes. According to the allegory, Hiram possesses the Master's word, the ultimate secret of spiritual architecture. He is confronted by three ruffians, symbolically named Jubila, Jubilo, and Jubilam, stationed at the south, west, and east gates of the temple.
So if they're demanding the master's word before earning it through the actual work, they are essentially trying to hack the spiritual process. They want the gold without doing the alchemy. They want the title without undergoing the nigredo.
That is exactly what the shadow does. It demands the reward without the sacrifice. The ruffians are driven by impatience, greed, and ego.
And when Hiram refuses...
When he refuses to violate his integrity and give them the word, they strike him down. They murder the architect.
Oh, wow.
Like Judas, these ruffians destroy what they do not yet understand. They act out of the unintegrated shadow, and in doing so, they completely fracture the sacred order.
The architect is dead, the blueprints are lost, the temple work is abruptly halted.
Everything falls apart.
The caterpillar has turned to goo.
Yes, but, and this is the key to the entire mystery, that shattering is necessary. Because Hiram's death is what kicks off the deeper search.
Right.
If the ruffians hadn't struck him down, the profound journey of recovery, the raising of the body, and the realization that the true word is spiritual, not vocal, would never happen.
Just as Judas's betrayal precipitates the crucifixion, which leads to the resurrection.
Exactly. The fracturing is the required catalyst for elevation.
Which connects directly to one of the most compelling symbols mentioned in the text, the broken ashlar.
Yes, a very profound symbol.
Now, I know an ashlar is a stone block used in building a wall or a foundation. The text says that the rough ashlar represents the unrefined, raw soul, just a jagged rock pulled directly from the quarry.
Right.
And the perfect ashlar is the smoothed, squared, perfected stone that represents the enlightened initiate ready to take their place in the temple. But Judas is described as the broken ashlar.
The work that was interrupted, misdirected, or abandoned.
The stone that cracked under the mason's chisel.
He is the ruin. the embodiment of failure on the path.
But I have to push back on this because practically speaking, if you are building a temple, a broken stone is useless.
It seems that way, yeah.
You can't put weight on it, you sweep it away, you
Yeah.
throw it out into the rubble pile. So how is focusing on a fundamentally broken stone actually helpful to someone trying to build their own spiritual foundation? How does the broken ashlar serve the initiate?
This raises an important question about how we define value in our own growth. You are right. A broken stone cannot be used to bear weight in a perfect wall. But think about what happens mechanically when a stone breaks under the chisel.
It reveals its interior.
Exactly. It shows you the hidden fault lines, the unseen weaknesses, the mineral impurities that were inside the rock all along.
Oh, wow.
If it hadn't broken now, during the shaping process, it might have broken later under the weight of the roof and brought down the entire temple.
So the break is revealing the truth of the material.
Judas, the broken ashlar, proves to us that failure is not final. It is diagnostic. It is an opportunity for a deeper, far more honest rebuilding.
That is incredibly powerful.
When we experience a moral failing, when we betray our own ideals, our ego cracks open. We are forced to look at the raw, jagged reality of who we actually are, not the polished version we pretend to be.
That is why the adversary is necessary.
Yes. The text notes that the compasses in Masonry are used to circumscribe desires and keep passions within due bounds. Judas reminds us that passion without light, ambition without a foundation, leads inevitably to the ruin of the stone. He is simultaneously a warning of what not to do and a gateway to doing it better next time, because you finally know where your fault lines are.
So, what does this all mean? We have traveled from the lost Gnostic Gospels of the Egyptian desert, through the alchemical putrefaction of the soul, all the way to the architectural symbols of Freemasonry encoded in art.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. For you, the listener, trying to make sense of this dense, esoteric material in your everyday life, there are 3 massive takeaways from this deep dive.
Number 1 being, the shadow must be faced.
Exactly. Avoiding your inner Judas, pretending you don't have a dark side capable of betrayal, only gives it power to operate in secret. Confronting your capacity for failure isn't a setback. It is a fundamental requirement of spiritual growth.
And number 2, disillusionment and destruction are unavoidable steps on the path. The ego's temple has to fall, the caterpillar has to dissolve, before a stronger, truer self can be rebuilt.
And number 3, no fall is ever final. The broken stone is just data for the next attempt.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the figure of Judas is asking us to look directly in the mirror. He is the threshold guardian.
We spend so much energy in our lives trying to avoid the fall.
We really do.
Yeah.
We try to be perfect ashlars right out of the quarry, faking our perfection. But the secret of initiation, the true mystery of the esoteric traditions, is not to avoid the fall entirely.
It is to descend into the darkness with awareness.
To willingly allow the false ego to break so that the authentic spirit can be freed. We have to experience the total eclipse of the Negredo to ever truly understand the dawn.
We all have an inner Judas, that part of us that whispers for the easy way out, the part that guards our deepest fault lines. But as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a slightly different paradigm to mull over.
Okay.
If Judas was operating on a necessary divine principle to fulfill a role that triggered enlightenment, do we owe our real-life villains gratitude?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Right. Think about the people in your own life who have acted as your adversaries. The boss who fired you, the partner who betrayed you, the friend who walked away. Were they just villains in your story?
Or were they something more?
Or, looking back, were they actually your greatest spiritual initiators in disguise, forcing you to completely rebuild a much stronger version of yourself? Something to think about until our next deep dive.